last episode, we defined 3 separate body plans for 3 possible organisms that we can evolve later. In this episode, we're going to see how these creatures adapt to living in the open oceans. First of all, we'll have to evolve a creature more suited for swimming in the water. The Myzerids already have fins, so they're probably a good starting point. Several creatures have evolved to look like fish, especially on Earth. Other creatures that are from Earth also evolved to look like fish. It seems, due to drag, that this seems to be the best way to evolve for aquatic locomotion. The Myzerids will evolve their frontmost pair of limbs to constantly pump water into their gills. Meanwhile, their other 3 will be flat and will be exclusively for locomotion. They will also evolve a leaf-shaped muscular tail that will help push them forward through the water. There will also likely be fierce competition within the clade, with some species evolving to attack others. This will likely lead to the evolution of shells, giving them slight protection and an increased dorsal fin. I will call this clade Cochlobrachidae, and eventually they may split off into multiple different groups. With the abundance of phytoplankton, zooplankton will likely emerge as well. Another group of Myzerid could evolve to be microscopic. At this scale, feeding on the phytoplankton would be less like filter feeding and more like eating plants for land animals. At this scale, moving around water would be more like moving around syrup. Therefore, they will evolve large arms relative to their body size, the tips of which would be lined with hair-like sensory organs to help them find food easier. This clade, which we'll call microbrachia, meaning small arms, would quickly diversify to take over every single microscopic niche there is, slowly becoming the main form of zooplankton found across all the open ocean ecosystems. This group, along with the cochlobrachids from earlier, will make up the 2 main groups of Myzerids moving on. While I could go into detail about the different radiations of microscopic organisms that the microbrachids eventually evolve into, that would make for a pretty boring video. With even more plankton around, it could be useful for filter-feeding organisms to swim through their prey rather than being stuck to the ground. Many sessile organisms on Earth have evolved to detach themselves from the sea bed to give them more maneuverability. After all, being able to chase your prey is a lot more efficient than waiting for it to come to you. A group of trichodonts could evolve to use their mouth parts to flap across the water, in a similar way to jellyfish on Earth. Their mouths would evolve to be huge and more like blankets than anything else, and their once spade-like feet would evolve into vestigial ornamental structures. Since they reproduce asexually, they'd be able to breed fast and quickly take over the niche of slow-moving filter-feeding organisms. I'll call these creatures dontopods, due to their teeth feet. However, there are still many zooplankton niches still left unfilled. A group of dontopods could evolve for their mouth parts to be outside of their bodies, with their actual main body functioning more as a shell. They would be able to grab up any pieces of phytoplankton they find, and some clades might even evolve sharp, hooked teeth at the end of their feeding organs that would allow them to eat the similarly sized microbrachids. I will call this clade Extoria, and with the dontopods they'll form a sister clade to the old trichodonts called the Liberopedia, meaning free feet. By this point, filter-feeding organisms have a lot to feed on, and the dontopods, while being filter-feeding, have an unusual shape and can't get very large. A species of cochlobrachid could potentially fill that niche very well. One group of them could evolve to have their shells form a beak-like structure, while their front pair of arms evolves to have these as well. This would allow them greater manipulation of their environment. They would still have their proboscis, but for most of the day it would be closed in their beak to prevent damage, and with their front pair of limbs forming a beak, meaning they would only have 4 limbs left, which they could utilize in different ways for unique modes of swimming. One group could evolve for fast swimming, using mainly the back halves of their bodies to propel themselves. They would evolve to make themselves thinner and more aerodynamic, and keep their tails flat and sharp, while their front fins they would use mostly for turning and steering quickly. Since they'd mostly be occupying mesopredatory niches, they would evolve sharp hooks in their beaks to catch prey more efficiently. This is common in predatory fish on Earth, as catching slippery, fast-moving prey requires hooks to keep them in place so they can't slip out of your jaws. I'll call this group Acurostria, meaning sharp beaks. Another group may evolve bristles in their beaks, similar to that of the trichodonts. These would allow them to catch plankton, and since plankton doesn't move and is a really easy food source, it would allow them to get huge, This is similar to the whale sharks and long-extinct lead-sichthies of Earth. With similar filter-feeding methods, it allowed them to be the largest fishes around at their time. Since they'll be so big, they'll need huge fins. Instead of adapting for speed, they'll adapt for mobility, having huge fins that go up and down to have them glide across the water similar to wings. Meanwhile, they would evolve wide backs and huge shells to protect them from the predatory Asterostria. I will call this clade Hesporidae, meaning hairy mouth forms. With such huge creatures taking up most of the oceans and occupying the large filter-feeding niches, certain symbiotic relationships might evolve for creatures to take advantage of it. Mutualism is a symbiotic relationship where two creatures work together to mutually benefit each other. Examples include clownfish and anemone, and certain cleaner fish that clean out sharks' teeth. A group of rastomids could evolve to cling to the Hesperids, using specialized tiny claws to hook onto their shells. The Hesperids will likely have tiny parasites and clinging algae on their shells, so having a creature specially evolved to eat them would be beneficial for both. The rastomids could get a free, easy meal and protection, while the Hesperids get a clean shell. These rastomids, which I'll call Hesplantodonts, would also have flat, broad teeth to rip off and scrape at the Hesperid shells to clean anything they can off of them. Not all symbiotic relationships provide mutual benefit for both creatures. For example, commensalism is where only one creature gets benefits while the other creature is completely unaffected. Examples of this include barnacles on Earth, which live on large creatures like whales, however provide no benefit to them. For our example, a group of trichodonts could evolve to live on the shells of Hesperids, using their once spade-like feet to cling onto their shells. This would provide no benefit for the Hesperids. However, it would allow these trichodonts to get closer to their food source without having to evolve swimming. They'll also evolve coloration similar to the shells of those that they inhabit. That way, they could avoid detection from the mutualistic Hesplantodontids. I'll call these creatures Cetehorts, meaning bristle gardens. With these extra clades living on top of them, the Hesperids have almost evolved their own independent ecosystems, floating way above the ocean floor. On that seafloor, life has also been evolving to be more specialized for its environment. A group of rastomids have evolved a color similar to the sand at the seafloor, allowing them to hide from predators. And their front two limbs have become tipped with sensory organs, allowing them to further feel around for anything they can break down hidden in the sand. I'll call these creatures mortiforms, meaning death shapes, as they feed off of dead and decaying organic matter. In order to carve out their own niche and not be in competition with the faster Acurostrids, an ancestral branch of Cochlobranchid could evolve a cupped mouth part at the end of its proboscis, allowing it to sift the sand for any mortiforms it could find. Though they wouldn't get very large, they'd fill a very useful ecological niche, and thus I'll call these creatures Chirostomids, for their hand mouths. The final ecological niche I'll talk about in this video is an ambush predator. A relative of the mortiforms could evolve to burrow into the sand, having sharp claws at the end of its hands, and using it to ambush any creatures that come close to it, dragging them into the sand and killing them. They would also evolve to close their gills whenever they're underwater, and only open them when they're out roaming around. This way, sand doesn't get into their gills and slowly suffocate them. I will call this group Cryptochira, meaning hidden hands. With that, we now have a much more complex food web for the open oceans, and detailed family trees for the 3 body plans we designed in the last episode. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And stay tuned for next week's episode where we cover the reefs.